In the dim glow of the kiln, Victor's hands moved with calculated precision, shaping molten glass into a masterpiece of love and betrayal. But this wasn't just art. It was a weapon. Hidden within its delicate curves was a secret so damning, it would shatter more than just fragile trust. By the time the final piece was unveiled, 2 lives would be in ruins, and Victor's vengeance would be immortalized forever. Nothing is as fragile as loyalty, and nothing cuts deeper than broken glass. The kiln had always been Victor's sanctuary, a place where heat and pressure transformed fragile shards into transcendent beauty. Today, however, even the comforting glow of molten glass couldn't quell the uneasy tension twisting his stomach. He set down his tools, wiping his hands on his worn apron, and glanced out the studio's wide windows. The forest surrounding their mountain home stood solemn, the trees stoic against the late afternoon light. This was his haven, far removed from the chaos of city life, a place he had built with Miranda over years of love and labor. Yet lately, there had been cracks in that love, faint but widening, like hairline fractures in his delicate creations. Miranda had always been his muse. She floated through his studio in colorful scarves and flowing dresses, her laughter like wind chimes in a summer breeze. But recently, her laughter had become scarce, her eyes distant. She spoke of art retreats in the valley, needing inspiration, needing space. Victor didn't question it. How could he, when Miranda had been his North Star for over a decade? But the signs were impossible to ignore. There were the late nights when she claimed to be sketching by the lake, returning with damp hair and a faint scent that didn't belong to their home. The phone calls she answered in hushed tones. And Leo, Victor's apprentice, a young and eager protege who had shown unusual interest in accompanying Miranda on her artistic escapes. Victor told himself he was overthinking. Miranda had supported him through everything, even during the lean years when his glasswork barely sold. She wouldn't betray him, would she? Yet the suspicion gnawed at him, a steady drumbeat of doubt. It was a chance discovery that cracked his fragile world. That evening, as Victor tidied up the studio, he noticed something odd on the workbench. Miranda's sketchbook, left carelessly among Leo's tools. She guarded her sketchbook like a treasure, never allowing anyone to peek inside. Curiosity won over hesitation, and he flipped it open. The pages were filled with rough sketches of entwined figures, their poses too intimate to be mere studies of form. Scribbled beside them were phrases in her delicate handwriting. The fire we cannot resist, our forbidden nights, and worse, dates that coincided with her supposed retreats. Victor's breath caught. The room seemed to tilt, the glowing kiln mocking him with its searing heat. He slammed the sketchbook shut, heart pounding. The realization struck him like a hammer to fragile glass. Miranda wasn't just slipping away. She was shattering their life piece by piece. Victor's hands tightened into fists. He had dedicated his existence to creating beauty, but in that moment, the desire for destruction flickered inside him like a smoldering ember. It was then that he decided. If Miranda wanted to destroy their life, he would help her, on his terms. Victor couldn't sleep that night. The glow of the moon seeped through the curtains, casting shadows that seemed to writhe like restless spirits. Miranda lay beside him, her back turned, her breathing even and serene. The betrayal felt surreal in the dim light, like a bad dream he couldn't wake from. His mind churned, replaying the clues he had ignored. The times Miranda left her phone behind, claiming she didn't want distractions. The unexplained purchases, lingerie he'd never seen her wear for him, gas station receipts from towns she had no reason to visit. Her growing detachment, subtle but unmistakable, was now impossible to deny. He stared at her silhouette, wondering who she had become. The woman he adored, the one who had inspired his finest works, was a stranger. And Leo, the apprentice he had trusted with his art, had likely betrayed him just as deeply. The thought festered, igniting a mix of rage and humiliation. The next morning, Victor's resolve hardened. As Miranda kissed his cheek absent-mindedly and left for yet another day at the retreat, he set a plan in motion. He wasn't ready to confront her outright. He needed more than sketches and gut feelings. He needed undeniable proof. Victor spent the day observing, pretending to immerse himself in his work. He asked Leo to create a series of glass figurines, deliberately assigning tasks that kept the young apprentice tied to the studio. Leo didn't seem suspicious, though his demeanor had changed in recent months. The once eager enthusiasm was tempered, his movements slightly hesitant, as if weighed down by some unspoken guilt. When Miranda returned that evening, Victor greeted her with his usual warmth, masking the anger bubbling beneath his calm exterior. He watched her closely, noting how her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, how she avoided meeting his gaze for too long. After dinner, she excused herself to sketch in her private nook. Victor followed quietly and saw her unlock a drawer where she stashed her sketchbook. When she left the room, he slipped inside and found the key still in the lock. Inside the drawer were more damning artifacts: a hotel receipt, a pair of men's cufflinks, and a photo that nearly brought him to his knees. Miranda stood in a field of sunflowers, her head tilted back in laughter, and Leo beside her, his hand possessively on her waist. Victor's fingers trembled as he held the photo. It wasn't just the image. It was the joy on her face, a brightness he hadn't seen in years. It was a look she used to reserve for him. The rage was unbearable now, hot and consuming. He returned the items to the drawer and left the room, his chest heaving with the weight of what he'd uncovered. That night, he didn't sleep again. Instead, he lay awake, crafting the foundation of his revenge. Miranda and Leo had no idea who they were dealing with, or what Victor was capable of. By the time the sun rose, Victor's anger had crystallized into something sharp and deliberate. He would unravel their lives just as meticulously as he created his masterpieces. And when he was finished, they wouldn't just be broken, they'd be obliterated. Victor began his plan with the same care and precision he applied to his art. For over a week, he maintained the facade of a devoted husband and mentor, his movements calculated and his words measured. Each day, he observed Miranda and Leo closely, looking for weaknesses, vulnerabilities, and opportunities. Miranda, blissfully unaware, continued her routine, drifting in and out of the house with vague excuses, her sketchbook always clutched protectively. Leo, though slightly more cautious, seemed too naive to suspect anything. His youthful arrogance was Victor's first tool. The chance came one late afternoon when Leo was cleaning up the workshop. Victor joined him, casually remarking that his newest piece, a centerpiece for an upcoming gallery show, needed to be flawless. He mentioned how much he appreciated Leo's hard work and, with a deliberate edge of vulnerability, confessed that Miranda had been distant lately. Leo froze for a split second, the glass vial in his hand nearly slipping. He recovered quickly, offering platitudes about how Miranda might just be finding herself, and how relationships took work. But Victor saw through him. The guilt was there, lingering in his downcast eyes and halting speech. Victor leaned in, his tone conspiratorial. "I'm glad I have you to depend on," he said. "Sometimes I feel like you're the only person who really gets what I'm trying to do here." Leo visibly relaxed, nodding eagerly. "Of course, Victor. I've learned so much from you. You're a true master." Victor smiled inwardly. Flattery was easy bait, and Leo swallowed it whole. That night, Victor added another piece to his plan. After Miranda went to bed, he snuck into the studio and worked late into the night, sculpting something unique. It was a simple design, a glass figurine of two entwined lovers, their bodies delicately curved to form a heart. But he embedded within it a secret, invisible to the naked eye. Using a technique he rarely employed, Victor etched a microscopic message into the base. For Miranda and Leo, with love. It was subtle, imperceptible unless viewed under a specific angle of light, but he knew Miranda's eye for detail wouldn't miss it. The next morning, he placed the figurine in the center of their dining table, claiming it was a surprise gift for Miranda, a token of his love and appreciation. Her eyes lit up as she examined it, and for a brief moment, Victor saw the woman he had fallen in love with. But that warmth turned icy when her gaze lingered on the base. Her smile faltered. She quickly set the figurine down, avoiding Victor's searching eyes. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice strained. Not as beautiful as you, Victor replied smoothly, masking his satisfaction. The rest of the day, Miranda seemed distracted, her movements jittery. That evening, Victor feigned exhaustion and went to bed early, leaving her to wrestle with whatever thoughts the figurine had planted. At midnight, he awoke to the sound of whispered voices. Quietly, he crept down the hall, stopping just before the studio door. Inside, Miranda and Leo stood close, their faces pale as they studied the figurine under a lamp. "What do we do?" Leo hissed, his voice panicked. Miranda's reply was clipped and frantic. "We destroy it. He can't know." Victor stepped back into the shadows, his heart pounding. Not with pain, but with exhilaration. His trap had worked. They were scrambling, and their fear was delicious. Let them try to cover their tracks, he thought. It was only the beginning. They had no idea the lengths he would go to dismantle their world. For every shard of glass they shattered, he would ensure their lives crumbled alongside it. Miranda didn't know Victor was watching as she and Leo took the glass figurine into the night. He remained hidden in the studio's shadows, listening as they argued in hushed tones about how best to get rid of the evidence. "Smash it," Leo insisted, his voice trembling. "Just throw it in the woods, far from here." "No," Miranda shot back, clutching the delicate sculpture like it was a loaded weapon. "If he finds the pieces, he'll know. It has to disappear completely." Victor allowed himself a small smile. She wasn't wrong. He had crafted the figurine from a special blend of borosilicate glass, highly durable and nearly indestructible. Breaking it wouldn't be enough. Miranda's dilemma was exactly what he had planned. The next morning, she seemed calm, but Victor knew better. Over breakfast, she casually mentioned needing to go to town, offering to run errands for him. Victor waved her off with a warm smile. "Take your time," he said, sipping his coffee. "You've been so busy lately. You deserve a break." As soon as she left, he began his second move. Victor drove to Leo's small apartment on the edge of town, his breath measured and his expression unreadable. When Leo answered the door, his face flashed with unease, but Victor offered him a friendly smile. "Leo, I need your help with something," Victor said, stepping inside uninvited. "It's a delicate matter, requires a steady hand and a sharp mind. Yours specifically." Leo swallowed hard, clearly unprepared for Victor's visit. "Of course," he stammered. "What do you need?" Victor gestured toward the small kitchen table, where Leo's unfinished glass pieces were scattered. "I've been thinking of pushing the boundaries of our craft. Something experimental." Leo frowned, intrigued but wary. "Experimental how?" Victor leaned closer, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "Combining glass and fire in a way that's transformative. I want you to help me test the limits." The young apprentice blinked, clearly unsure where this was going. "Glass and fire," he repeated, as if trying to buy time to understand Victor's true intentions. Victor straightened, his smile widening. "Yes, you and Miranda both inspire me in different ways, Leo. She told me how much she admires your creativity. I think we can create something extraordinary together, if you're up for the challenge." The mention of Miranda's name made Leo's jaw tighten. Victor noted the reaction with satisfaction. Before Leo could respond, Victor clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Let's discuss it tomorrow at the studio. Bring your best ideas. I'm counting on you." As Victor left, he glanced back to see Leo standing frozen in the doorway, visibly unsettled. That evening, Miranda returned home, her demeanor tightly controlled. Victor watched her unpack the groceries with exaggerated care, her hands lingering on each item a moment too long. She was trying to act normal and she was failing. "How was town?" Victor asked, his tone casual as he poured himself a glass of wine. "Fine," she said quickly. "Busy. Nothing interesting." Victor raised his glass in a mock toast. "Two uneventful days, then." Miranda nodded, avoiding his eyes. Later that night, Victor returned to the studio under the guise of checking on a cooling sculpture. Inside, he found the kiln still warm, the faint scent of burning glass lingering in the air. Miranda and Leo had destroyed the figurine as she'd planned, but not without leaving traces. Victor crouched by the kiln, inspecting the ashes. Among the blackened fragments, a faint glimmer caught his eye. The microscopic inscription had survived, melted into the base of the shattered glass. He ran a finger over the warped remains, feeling a surge of grim satisfaction. Miranda and Leo thought they had erased his message, but their panic had left them careless. Victor's pulse quickened as he stood, his mind racing with possibilities. Let them burn what they like, he thought. They'll soon learn that fire doesn't cleanse, it consumes. Tomorrow the real game would begin, and this time he wouldn't be so subtle. Victor spent the night refining the next phase of his plan, his mind a vortex of schemes and possibilities. As dawn broke, he greeted Miranda with the same serene demeanor he had adopted since his discovery, masking the storm of rage beneath. She, in turn, continued her strained act, her smiles brittle, her touches fleeting. By midday, Victor set the trap. "Leo and I will be working late tonight," he told Miranda casually over lunch. "We're starting a new project, something bold and ambitious. You should stop by if you're free. I'd love your opinion on it." Miranda stiffened, her fork pausing mid-air. Her face betrayed a flicker of panic before she composed herself. "Oh, I have plans in town," she said quickly. Victor smiled, as if unaware of her discomfort. "No problem. You're always so busy these days. Maybe another time." She relaxed, but not entirely. He could see her mind working, wondering what he was plotting. If he knew. Later, Victor met Leo at the studio, greeting the apprentice with a camaraderie that bordered on fatherly affection. "Leo," he began warmly, "you're about to play a pivotal role in something groundbreaking." Leo hesitated, his nervousness poorly masked. "What's the project?" Victor gestured to a covered work table. "We're creating a series that explores duality, beauty and destruction, passion and betrayal. I want to incorporate techniques that push the boundaries of our craft." Leo nodded, trying to focus on Victor's words, but his unease was evident. Victor unveiled a prototype, a pair of intertwined glass forms, their fragility mirroring the balance of trust and deception. He handed Leo one of the figures. "This is your piece to complete," he said. Leo took it reluctantly, his hands shaking slightly. "It's beautiful," he murmured, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's also delicate," Victor added, his tone sharp. "The smallest mistake, the slightest imbalance, and it shatters. Much like relationships. Wouldn't you agree?" Leo glanced up, his face pale. "Yeah," he stammered. "I guess so." Victor leaned closer, his gaze unrelenting. "Trust is everything, Leo. Without it, even the strongest bonds break." Leo's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, avoiding Victor's piercing stare. The rest of the evening passed in tense silence, with Victor offering occasional critiques of Leo's technique. Each comment was laced with subtle double meanings, designed to burrow into Leo's already guilty conscience. As midnight approached, Victor announced he was stepping out for a break, leaving Leo alone in the studio. What Leo didn't know was that Victor had rigged a small camera hidden among the shelves, its lens trained on the apprentice's workspace. Victor lingered outside, pacing under the cold starlight. It wasn't long before his phone buzzed, a notification from the camera's live feed. He opened the app, watching as Leo abandoned his work and pulled out his phone, typing furiously. Victor's lips curled into a grim smile. He already knew who Leo was texting. Minutes later, Miranda arrived, slipping into the studio with the stealth of someone well-practiced in deceit. Victor watched the live feed, every fiber of his being taut with rage. "Victor's onto us," Leo whispered to her, his voice barely audible over the sound of the cooling kiln. "I can feel it. He knows." Miranda shushed him, placing a hand on his arm. "Keep calm," she said, though her own voice wavered. "He doesn't have proof. He's just suspicious." Leo's voice broke. "What if he does? What if?" Victor shut off the feed, unable to listen further. He didn't need to hear more. The scene had confirmed everything he already knew. Standing outside in the cold, Victor clenched his fists. The web was tightening around them, and soon they would feel its bite. Tonight's performance was just the beginning. Tomorrow, they would learn what it meant to betray a man who had nothing left to lose. Victor returned to the studio just as Miranda and Leo scrambled to create distance between them. Miranda feigned surprise at his entrance. "You're still up?" she asked, her voice overly casual. Victor raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd check on the progress." Leo muttered something about finishing for the night, quickly gathering his tools. Miranda lingered, as if testing Victor's reaction. "Both of you are working so hard," Victor said evenly, his gaze flicking between them. "I appreciate the dedication. Truly." They exchanged a nervous glance before stammering goodnight and slipping out together, unaware of the tiny tracker Victor had just placed in Miranda's bag. In the silence that followed, Victor stood alone, staring at the half-finished glass forms. The kiln's embers glowed faintly, mirroring the fire simmering inside him. It wouldn't be long now. Victor watched the tracker's blinking dot on his phone screen. Miranda and Leo had driven into town, stopping at a small motel on the outskirts. His jaw tightened, but he didn't move. There was no need to confront them yet. Their betrayal needed time to ripen, like fruit destined to rot. Instead, Victor spent the night preparing the next piece of his plan. By the time the sun rose, he had everything ready. New sculptures, carefully encoded with messages only Miranda would recognize. Each one was a whisper of the truth she was so desperate to hide. The next morning, Victor placed the first new sculpture prominently in the studio. A delicate pair of glass roses, their petals entwined. Miranda noticed it immediately. Her fingers traced the curves, but her hand froze as she caught the faint etching on one petal. "True beauty withers in deceit." Her face paled, but Victor pretended not to notice. "Do you like it?" he asked, his tone light. "It's haunting," she murmured, stepping back. Victor smiled to himself. The game had begun, and she knew she was being watched. Over the next few days, Victor introduced more sculptures. Each carried a hidden message, fragmented poetry about betrayal, trust, and ruin. Miranda grew increasingly tense, her hands trembling when she touched the pieces. Leo, oblivious to the details, only noticed her growing unease. "Is something wrong?" Victor asked one evening, his voice filled with feigned concern. Miranda shook her head quickly, avoiding his eyes. "I'm just overwhelmed. These new pieces, they're so intense." Victor nodded, his smile razor-sharp. "Art has a way of revealing truths, doesn't it?" Miranda flinched, but said nothing. She didn't need to. Late one evening, Victor found Miranda pacing in the studio, her breath shallow and her eyes darting to the sculptures. "You've been restless lately," he said, his voice calm but heavy with implication. She spun around, forcing a laugh. "It's just your work. So different now. Almost personal." Victor tilted his head, feigning confusion. "Isn't it always? You've inspired so much of it, after all." Her forced smile faltered. "Of course," she muttered, her voice barely audible. Victor stepped closer, his gaze unflinching. "I wonder if it's speaking to you differently now." She froze, her facade fracturing under the weight of his words. Victor's calculated pressure began to take its toll. Miranda became withdrawn, her usual confidence replaced by skittishness. She avoided lingering in the studio alone and grew irritable with Leo, their whispered exchanges often punctuated by arguments. Victor observed it all with quiet satisfaction, careful not to push too far too fast. One afternoon, Leo finally broke under the strain. "Victor," he said hesitantly, "is everything okay? You've been acting different lately." Victor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Change is inevitable, Leo. Sometimes, it's the only way to expose what's been hiding in the shadows." Leo's face blanched, but he said nothing more. The storm was nearly here. That evening, Victor unveiled his latest sculpture. A stunning, jagged glass heart, split cleanly in two. The fracture was deliberate, the edges sharp and uneven. Miranda's breath caught as she noticed the inscription along the crack. Love shatters when lies take root. She turned to Victor, her face pale. What inspired this one? Victor met her gaze, his expression unreadable. Life, he said simply. You'd be amazed at what reveals itself when you look closely. Miranda faltered, retreating without another word. Behind her, Victor's lips curled into a cold smile. The next night, Miranda couldn't contain herself. She cornered Leo in the studio after Victor had left for an errand. Her voice sharp with panic. He knows? She hissed, her hands gripping his arms. The sculptures, the messages, it's all for us. He's toying with us. Leo looked helpless, his face pale. We should confess. It's better than waiting for him to.
No.
Miranda snapped. If we tell him it's over, he'll destroy everything. Neither noticed the small recorder Victor had left hidden behind the shelf, capturing every word. The truth was now his. Victor played the recording the next evening during dinner. Miranda froze as her own voice filled the room, confessing everything to Leo in desperate, panicked tones. Her fork clattered to the table, and her face drained of color. Victor, He raised a hand, silencing her. His expression was calm, almost serene as he said, No more lies, Miranda. No more excuses. I know everything. Tears welled in her eyes, but Victor's gaze was unrelenting. You've broken something that can't be fixed, he continued, his voice cold. Now it's my turn. The room seemed to close in around her as his words hung heavy in the air. The next morning, the town awoke to find Victor's masterpiece displayed in the gallery window. A massive glass installation depicting two lovers intertwined, their forms shattering into jagged fragments. Etched across the base were the words, Deception burns brighter than truth, but it leaves only ash. News spread quickly, whispers filling the streets as people recognized the figures, painstakingly modeled after Miranda and Leo. The scandal was undeniable, their affair immortalized for all to see. Miranda fled the town in disgrace, her reputation in ruins. Leo vanished shortly after, unable to face the shame. Victor stood alone in the studio, surrounded by the echoes of his craft. He had lost everything, but in the destruction he found a grim satisfaction. His revenge was complete, his work eternal.